Good evening, everybody. We'd like to open the meeting a little early. We want to recognize School 27 for their wonderful service, and for some reason we had missed it at the last meeting, and we certainly didn't want to let them go unmentioned.
So the students of School Pennsylvania Avenue have participated in the Trex recycling program. The Trex recycling program helps keep thousands of pounds of waste out of landfills and provides a better understanding and appreciation for the importance of recycling. The students collected over 2,000 pounds of plastic to the recycling program. This outstanding accomplishment brings honor and acclaim not only to the individual students, their school, and their school district, but also to the entire community. It is the desire of the members of the Board of Education of the Township of Woodbridge to express their gratitude to the Pennsylvania Avenue School Number 27 and their advisor, Ron D. Solomon.
The June 28, 2018 meeting of the Woodbridge Township Board of Education will please come to order. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Del Pietro? Here. Mr. Harris? Mr. Harris?
He said here.
Mr. Molnar? Here. Mr. Sedana? Here. Mr. Velez? Here. And Mr. Treebwasser?
Here. Mr. Secretary, as required by the Sunshine Law, please read the notice of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. January 10th, 2018, and June 25th, 2018, emailed to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office, posted in Avenel Middle School and the Board of Education Administration Building.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Della Pietro, please read the board waiver on bylaw 9322.
Thank you, Mr. President. That the Board of Education hereby waives bylaw number 9322 with respect to the participation of a board member via electronic device in closed executive session of the June 28, 2018 meeting of the board.
I have a motion by Mr. Della Pietro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Molnar. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carried. Mr. Della Pietro, please read the closed session statement.
In compliance with the Sunshine Law, the board must go into closed session in order to discuss subjects exempted from the public portion of our meeting. The discussions to be held in closed sessions will be regarding personnel matters. There will also be a WTEA grievance hearing. Any information regarding the closed session discussion will be released to the public when the reasons for discussing these matters in closed session no longer exist.
Mr. Della Pietro, I've been advised by the board attorney that it is not a WTEA but an HIB hearing. So I have a motion by Mr. Della Pietro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carried. We'll return at 7. Please rise for a salute to the flag and a moment of silence.
The United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That's fine. Do I have a motion to reconvene?
So a motion?
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Del Pietro?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Sedana?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
Ms. Mr. Harris with us?
Not right now.
And Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Will someone make a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meetings?
So motion.
Motion by Mr. Sedana. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Velez. Are there any additions or corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Carried. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record the notice of bids received by the board.
Thank you, Mr. President. On June 19th, 2018, PD 1907B Lumber Supplies and Materials. June 22nd, 2018, an RFP for vending machines. June 22nd, 2018, an RFQ for pest control management.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record any communications or reports received by the board.
On June 18th, 2018, receipt of notice of hearing from the Woodbridge Township Zoning Board as follows. Block 409.09, Lot 353-282, Maubie Street, Woodbridge. June 19th, 2018, a thank you note from Woodbridge High School student Stephen Parent, recipient of the Kevin O'Brien Scholarship Award. June 20th, 2018, a thank you note from the Woodbridge High School student Brittany Saw, recipient of the Donald Westcott Memorial Scholarship Award. And June 21st, 2018, a thank you note from Woodbridge High School student Gabran Abdullahi, recipient of the Grace Hiroko Scholarship Award.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dr. Zaga, Superintendent's agenda, please.
Mr. President, I have 16 items to present to the board.
Do I have a motion for the superintendent's agenda?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Velez, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. Do I have any comments or questions from the board? Comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain.
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietro.
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana.
Yes.
Mr. Velez.
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser.
Yes.
Ms. Anderson, would you mind reading the policy and planning, please?
Policy and Planning Agenda, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Policy and Planning Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, presents the following 8 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sedana. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Please state your name and where you're from in the town.
David Pinkowitz, Island. I wanted to comment on the proposed change to policy 9322. This is the public and executive sessions policy. There is a proposal to allow those attending the meeting electronically to now be able to attend closed session subject to certain constraints. I have very mixed feelings about the original implementation of the electronic meeting. We have an empty iPad, I guess, staring me in the face by one of the board members who's not here. And in the last meeting when I was speaking during the same agenda during policy and planning, Ms. Anderson was communicating electronically. And I felt, the specific example of that was one where the arrival happened in the middle of when I was speaking, when public comment during the middle of the agenda item. And then after the policy and planning agenda and then one other agenda item, board member disappears and leaves the meeting. My feeling is that board members should be generally present at the meeting and that we've had a few too many exceptions with the electronics, not a lot, but more than I'd like to see where people are attending that way. And then when you get into a executive committee where there really is no way other than the word of the board member to verify that they are the only person in attendance, I think that's just a bad idea. I don't think it's a good idea, frankly, to have it at any meeting, but I really think it's a bad idea, this proposal, which is to now allow board members to attend electronically to an executive session, to a closed session. That's all I have to say. I don't
Thank you,
think
Mr.
it's a good idea.
Pinkowitz.
Thanks.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain.
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietro.
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana.
Yes.
Mr. Velez.
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser.
Yes. Mr. Sedana, will you read the curriculum agenda, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Curriculum Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendents for Curriculum and Instruction, presents the following 10 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing 10 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Sedana. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapetro?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Finance and Insurance, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Insurance Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following. Tonight, I will be moving 16 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Velez. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public?
All right. David Pinkowitz, Island. Item number 7, this is the proposed shared services agreement between Woodbridge Township and the Board of Education for custodial maintenance. So this is, as I understand it, the custodians that are in every one of the schools. First, just to clarify, that's correct? That's what this agreement's about?
Yes.
Okay. You know, when this first happened, when the board first went to hire custodians, they originally put things out to bid. They received bids, and then the mayor came in and said, you know, have a shared services agreement with the town. We'll give you this. We'll give you, I think it was snow cleaning. I don't know if that's still covered in this agreement. And, you know, it will be less expensive than the cost of, and all these custodians, many of the custodians will be able to keep their jobs. Of course, many of them couldn't keep their jobs because the town couldn't hire those that lived outside the township based on the township's rules for hiring. But also we were long past the issue of at least the board bearing the cost of unemployment. So the question I have is, you know, for any of these agreements, even though it may be the town and you're not required to put it out to bid, putting it out to bid certainly would be a wise move just to find out what the cost would be. What is the cost of taking care of the snow removal and taking care of the custodians using, you know, other private contractors versus doing it through the town? And has the board taken that effort to, before they decided to enter into an agreement again, have they checked to make sure that they're saving the taxpayers money, that they're doing what's best for the taxpayers and not just what, you know, keeps the town's coffers full?
Well, first of all, we don't do it to keep the town's coffers full, and I think that with the ancillary things that we get and concessions we get from the municipality, I think we are certainly competitive what would be if we went out to bid.
But how do we know? I mean, literally, how do you know?
So you suggest we go out to bid and then we're obligated to take the lowest bidder regardless, even if they don't meet the full needs?
Well, you have, I mean, there's already even
That's a
on the
yes or
same
no.
agenda.
That's not a tough answer.
Well, that's, I mean, they have to meet your needs. I mean, that's one of the requirements of the bid.
They
You
have
already
to meet,
have bids
they have to
being
meet the
pulled
bid on, they have to meet
on
the
this
requirements on the paper. That doesn't mean that they meet the needs. I've dealt with many a contractor, and I deal with it where I work currently. I think the deal that we're getting from the municipality is fair and equitable for both sides. And I appreciate your position.
I have
Thank
no
you.
idea whether it is or isn't. What I do have an idea is that we don't really know the answer. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir, Mr. Molnar.
just one comment. We do have an obligation to the taxpayer, absolutely, but we also have an obligation to our students. And I think that's one of the reasons why we kind of went the way we did, was because of, they were our people that were working in our buildings, and we were more comfortable than just having an outside company come in. We've seen it with transportation, where we'll have, you know, an outside busing company, and we'll have, you know, questions about a bus, you know, was the bus safe, bus routes not being done, you know, and we'll contact the company, and because we have the contract with them, you know, we have to kind of fight it out with them. But I think also too, a big thing with the town was that for the safety of our students, we knew the custodians, we know they live in town, we know they're our people, and that was a big reason. You know, the unemployment insurance was definitely the big, but, you know, also safety factor. So let's keep the students in mind too.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapetro?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Velez? Yes. Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Security and Safety Agenda, Mr. Delapietro.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Safety and School Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, presents the following one item. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Delapietro. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Anderson. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Velez? Yes. Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Buildings and Grounds Agenda, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Buildings and Grounds Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following. I'll be moving one item this evening.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Velez. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Velez? Yes. Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Transportation Agenda, Mr. Velez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Transportation Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Board Administrator, Board Secretary, present the following five items. I move for the adoption of foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Velez. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Anderson. Any comments or questions from the board? I have one. Mr. Wolferman,
Yes.
can you please ask Mr. Sinelli to give me a breakdown on the number of non-public students on the routes?
Will do, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the public?
All right, David Pinko at Sizzlin. I just want to ask the board, is the item number 1, is this the same agenda item I had asked about in the last meeting? The Mother Seton routes?
It's a Mother Seton run. If that's what you asked about, then I'm
Okay.
assuming it's the same Mother Seton. I'm not aware of
Then
another one.
I just wish to thank the board or the Transportation Director for correcting that situation. That was the same route I brought up last year, where we paid for the route even though the aid in lieu of transportation would have been lower for the same number of students. So obviously, the same must be true this year, and I appreciate the board making that correction.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain? Yes. Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Personnel Agenda, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Personnel Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Director of Personnel Services, presents the following. Tonight, I will be moving 28 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Anderson. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
I'll be abstaining on items number 12 and 13, yes on all the rest.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Mr. Bush, do you have any recommendations this evening?
Not at this time, Mr. President.
Is there any old business that should be brought before the attention of the board? Is there any new business that should be brought before the attention of the board? In keeping with our past practice, we will open up this portion of the meeting for statements from the public. If you wish to say something, please come to the microphone, provide your name, your address for the record, and please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with our regulation 1100D.
Keith Elmo from Colonia. Mr. President, Dr. Zaga, ladies and gentlemen of the board, I'm here tonight in regards to the request I made on May 17th of this year to go back to school and receive my high school diploma. Mr. President, has the board come to a definitive answer on that?
We'll have the board attorney send you our response.
Okay. You know, while I'm here, let me just ask a couple of more questions, if I could.
You got 5 minutes, go for it.
Thank you. I am in receipt of an email from the board representing the board, which says, and I quote, that it is not in the best interest of the student body and community to set this type of precedent. Not in the best interest of the student body and community. Was there a vote taken that maybe I don't know about or the community doesn't know about?
I'm sorry,
And
say
the-
that again, please?
I'm sorry?
Is there a,
Was
Oh.
there a vote taken? I mean, it says here that it's not in the best interest of the student body and community to set this type of precedent. I didn't know the community or the student body was canvassed and asked to vote on this. Didn't know that.
I don't believe they were.
I'd like to remind everyone on that May 17th meeting that Mayor Bush had said that one of the board members, Mr. Tamburillo, was here via Skype and via an iPad. And to use your words, Mr. Bush, welcome to a board meeting in 2018, and the board was going to have a different dynamic, to use your exact words. What a nice precedent that was set, right? It was a very nice precedent for the board to set that. Unfortunately, when the board wants to set a precedent for itself, it does it very quickly and with surgical decisiveness. But when it comes to setting a precedent for someone like me, a community member, a senior, who wants to feel good about themselves and maybe empower themselves, it's met with a lot of negativity. Mr. President, I gave to Ms. Rooney, when you were all in closed session, some papers regarding this very issue that I would like very much for you all to read. They're character reference letters from some very prominent community leaders, one of them being a Superior Court judge. So I'd like you all to read them. They are in complete support of me and complete support of what I want to do with my issue. And they completely refute the negativity that I've gotten from this board in regards to that. I'd like to also read something to you that I found on the internet I thought was kind of interesting, and I'll read the last sentence, which says, to engage the entire community in instructing and inspiring our students to be successful and significant beyond their classrooms. It's pretty good, it's pretty powerful, right? To engage the entire community. Yeah, if it sounds familiar, it is because it's the Woodbridge Township School District vision statement. So if it sounds familiar, it is. Look, I'm not going to give up on this. You can tell me no all you want. I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to come back stronger. I'm going to come back more. Okay? Because fortunately for me, I'm at a point in my life where I have the time, the resources, and the money to fight this. You keep telling me no, I'm not going to take no for an answer. Anyone like to ask me some questions? Anyone? Questions?
Through the chair.
Yes.
You referenced an email you
Yes.
received.
Yes, sir.
Who sent you the email, Mr. Allen?
I'm sorry?
Who sent you that email you referenced?
Mr. President, would you like to tell them who sent
I
it to
did.
me? There you go. President of the board sent it to me.
And I stand by it.
Okay. Well, I don't. I do not understand. I don't understand. You don't want to set this kind of, what bad precedent are you setting? What are you doing that's so wrong? I don't get it. You like to set precedents when it comes to something for the board.
Mr. Elmo, if I could just say to you, I mean, one thing I think you're missing in this conversation
Yeah.
is that it's the board's decision.
Is it?
It is the board's
It
decision.
is the board's decision?
It's the board's decision. And nothing that you have said, what you have said, I should say, nothing that this board has ever done has anything to do with you personally or your age, as
Oh,
you
yes, it does.
suggested earlier in the conversation that you're having with us. But what I'm going to say to you is that the board takes your request very seriously. The fact that the board president responded to you shows that continues to respond to you. I think maybe more than once has responded to you. I mean, look, this is something that the board gets to decide. There is no, just as a matter of course, not speaking to your situation in particular, there is no specific legal right for an adult, and in general, for an adult.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Mr. Bush.
For an
What did you say?
adult to be able to, as a matter of right, come back to school. That's a decision for the Board of Education to make. So again, you'll receive a letter from my office giving you your official decision, but and I don't say this in any, provocative way. You can come at us all you want. At the end of the day, the board gets to make a decision. It's going to stick by its decision, and that's going to be the end. And if you want to fight it, you can fight it. That's why the board has legal counsel.
Exactly. And you know I will. You know I will. You know what? You said to me it's not because of my age. Well, I was told, you know what, Mr. Elmo? You're too old. You're too old. You shouldn't have to go back to school. You can be determined as, if I'm not mistaken, a predatory threat to the student body and to the teachers. You know what? That's discrimination. Plain and simple. You're telling me because of my age, I'm a predatory threat? That's discrimination. And you know what? You should know, Mr. Bush, it's illegal. It's illegal to discriminate for age or anything else. And you know what? Being told I'm too old, you don't need to go back to school?
Sir,
discrimination.
I'm not going to continue to go back and forth,
That's
except
right.
I will
I'm not
say,
going back
for your sake and for the public's sake,
Yeah.
it would be illegal for the board to discriminate against you.
That's
the
right.
The board
Exactly.
the board is not discriminating against
No.
you. Okay, this board does not discriminate, and this board is fulfilling its legal obligation to this community by educating the kids that the law requires it educates. And that's all I'm going to say.
And then what precedent were you speaking about then, Mr. President? What precedent were you speaking about when you said we don't want to set this kind of a precedent?
Mr. Elmo, we're done talking about it.
You're not talking about it, no. Okay.
We're done
Well,
talking about
again, I'm going to tell all you ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to stop on this. You can tell me no all you want. What is so bad about what I want to do? I want to better myself. I want to empower myself. Read the letters from all the prominent members of this community about me and in support of me. What's so bad about what I want to do? Is it so bad to want to do what I need to do? I could go after school. If you think I'm a threat to the student body, send me after school. Send me to night school. Why can't I be via iPad or Skype like you're doing here tonight? Why can't that happen? There's a lot of different ways to do it. And Mr. Bush, I will fight it. You can say all you can say, you know what? You can say all you want. You can fight it, take us to court, do that. I will. And if I got to drag it through the courts and through the press, I will. Because you know what? You're wrong. You're wrong in denying me this. 100% wrong. You know it. You know it. You just don't want to, I don't know, I really don't know what it is. I really don't know what you have against me or what you have against this cause. But you know what? Just think about it. Maybe if you did something nice for someone, maybe they'd feel nice about it and it'd be the right thing to do. The right thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Elmo.
Mr. President,
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Vega, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
All right, David Pinkowitz, Island. First, before I get to the main thing I wanted to talk about, during the finance and insurance agenda, Mr. Molnar made some comments and then voted on the agenda item. So I wanted to get some clarification. Is Mr. Molnar no longer working for the Township of Woodbridge?
Yes, I am, but I'm not part of Public Works, so that's where the custodians are under. I'm Recreation. It's two different departments.
Okay. Well,
And I will abstain, as I have done in the past, when it borders my job function. As all the votes with School 29, I've abstained. So with going to Recreation, that's Public Works. It's a different director. It's a different department.
okay. I'll accept your comment for now. I'll decide what to do that later. Anyway, as to what I wanted to speak about, this is again regarding the proposed policy for random drug and alcohol testing. First, one thing I wanted to do is comment on a few of the board members that commented to me. One in the meeting, Mr. Della Pietro. One during the parent forum, Mr. Sedano. Both those gentlemen appeared to be essentially attacking me as if I were literally killing children. And Mr. Sedano pulled out his inner Khrushchev and literally started banging the table. The only thing he didn't do was pull his shoes off. You know, that was, in my mind, completely inappropriate. Fight against the argument, fine. Fight against, in the facts, fine. But to argue that somebody just doesn't have, unless you have evidence to the contrary, to argue that somebody doesn't care about the students of Woodbridge, to argue that someone has some other ulterior motive, unless you have evidence to that, I think that was inappropriate. But getting more into the specifics of the issue itself, one of the questions Mr. Treebwasser, the board president, asked at the meeting, which wasn't fully answered, I tried to answer it at the meeting somewhat, but it wasn't really, it was more of a rhetorical question, is what's the worst that can happen by doing this policy? So I decided to find out what the worst that could happen by doing this policy. In the state of in January of 2011, state of Virginia, a 15-year-old Nick Steuben killed himself after disciplinary action taken related to a drug offense of marijuana. April 2009, Josh Anderson, also for Virginia, 17-year-old, same thing, suicide. Hayden Long, 16, from Ohio, October 2015, a suicide. The idea that there are no consequences, no matter, the consequences only come by not doing the policy, I think is wrong. And you could say, well, the only thing they'll do is lose their activities. But the reality is that while those who commit suicide may think they're being rational for whatever they're doing at the time, and many others may think it's an irrational idea, we don't always know. The reality is, for deaths, so I got complaints about the surveys and trends, and because they didn't go the way of the board, everyone's saying surveys don't mean anything. So we'll talk about facts. From the age group from 15 to 19 in 2015, there were a total of 772 overdose deaths in the entire nation. That's total. Of those, that includes both accidental deaths, the type of deaths we're really aiming at, and it also includes suicide deaths. So about 8/10 of those were known to be accidental overdoses. 15% of those were known to be suicides, and about 5% were unknown as to which way they go. So they could be in either category, potentially. On the other hand, suicides. In the same year, 2,061 suicides in the same age group. And that source comes from the CDC. The other source comes from the National Center for Health Statistics, both government agencies. So I think the board is being unwise when it just focuses blindly in one direction and doesn't look at all the facts. And, the last part, obviously, one of the things I've complained about is that we're not even talking about this with the general public until the summertime. Literally, the Honeywell, or not Honeywell anymore, the alert went out from the superintendent's office at about, I think it was 2 in the afternoon, after school had let out in all schools for the year. The board clearly doesn't want to hear from people, even though the School Ethics Act says board members should take into account the people that are affected by policies when they make decisions. I think the board is wrong. You'll be hearing from me again on July 9th.
That's good. Mr. Pinkwitz, first of all, thank you very much. I always appreciate your adept ability at researching and coming up with facts and figures. And I think if you could spend that time trying to help us come up with a solution to the problem, instead of pointing out to me that every effort is not worth the effort, it would be so much more helpful. I would rather have you on our team instead of standing opposing our team. We think it's the right decision. I think it's tragic that a child would kill themselves over testing positive. But is the alternate to that not knowing that they're on drugs and letting it get worse until they overdose? I don't know what the right answer is. And like I said to you, until I know what the right answer is, I'm going to keep trying, because doing nothing is just not acceptable. So if you could spend your effort and your true skill at research and coming up with things, I would applaud the fact if you could give us some suggestions on what would be a viable solution to this problem. And I think it's a lot worse than 700 and however many kids you said it was nationwide.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I
just
don't know.
going by the facts, as presented.
And I'm not questioning your facts, and I'm not questioning your research. All I'm saying to you is that you put a lot of effort into pointing out what we do wrong. I think if you put that same effort into trying to help us to do it right, would have significant improvement. Thank you.
Thanks. And if I can, I would love to, but that's assuming that there is something the board truly can do to solve the problem. And
I don't
that's the
think we can
biggest
solve it, but we can certainly try and make a dent in it. Just doing nothing is just not acceptable.
Fair enough. And one quick question. One of the things brought up in the meeting was about urine testing, which of course does not appear anywhere in the policy. So is the board presenting a new policy and proposing a new policy, or is there no urine testing?
In the appeals process, it was listed.
Well, I'll look into it for you, Mr. Pinkowitz.
All right, thanks.
Real quick, Mr. President, through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Zaga, this is the second time Mr. Pinkowitz came up to the mic and said we've only done this in the summertime. We've had 9 meetings, right? 10 meetings? When was the first time you brought it to the board's attention when you addressed President's Council?
That was, first President's Council was in February, I believe.
February, so it was during the school year.
As were the meetings that were held at the 5 middle schools and the 3 high schools.
So this was our only meeting that was done outside of the school calendar year, not our calendar year, because we operate year-round.
That's correct.
Thank
And
you.
we plan on more meetings.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jill Egger. I'm from Woodbridge. I'm going to read this, most of it, so I don't forget anything, and so I try to keep this under 5 minutes. I represent Road to Hope, a support group dedicated to helping the addicted and their families. In addition to support emotionally, we do fundraising to assist with the cost of recovery. The main focus of our group is to keep people out of addiction and to save lives. I speak from a different perspective, as many at the meeting with Dr. Vega, because I happen to have lost my daughter. She lost her battle to heroin. With regards to the random drug testing proposal, we as a group, we are 100% in favor of it, and we urge you to vote yes. Having attended the first informational meeting led by Dr. Vega, I respect everyone's opinion, and hopefully I can agree to disagree. I personally didn't find one argument compelling enough against the proposal to merit squashing it. In fact, the meager attendance was not representative of the entire body of parents of Woodbridge Township. The handful of parents who opposed this were confusing the random drug testing with the long-standing under the influence. What they need to remember is this random drug testing is preventative, it's not punitive, there is no suspension from school, it cannot be shared with local law enforcement, it is random, voluntary, nobody is being targeted, it promotes awareness. The 2 things that really stuck out in my mind, number 1, because it promotes awareness, it's a godsend for parents who don't know that their child is using, and they can intervene. I personally did not know that my daughter was using. She had very few symptoms. She slept a lot, she had headaches. She hid it. A lot of kids can hide it. Number 2, a very positive thing about this is that there is mandatory counseling. And as we know, a lot of children do this. They start to use because they're self-medicating, and this will reduce the need for them to self-medicate. They cover their pain. This is therapeutic for them to receive counseling. Which brings me to another argument. The weakest argument I heard, and I have heard this from many parents outside of the meeting, it is par for the course for students to party. It's part of growing up. Many who use, they don't do it to have fun, but to cope with depression and anxiety. Far more students get their high through achievements in academics and extracurricular activities and other drug-free recreation. They set goals, they keep busy, they're happy. There's another epidemic called Not My Child that's affecting response to joining the fight. People don't want to face the fact that it can happen to them. I know, I was one of them. It was denial. This epidemic is huge. It's not just for people who have it in their families or even know someone who does. This is everyone's responsibility. As a community, it is our duty to fight this. The main reason we should become involved is because we are all pieces of this big ball called humanity. That's why we have paramedics, we have fighter fighters that rush into burning buildings to save people. They are strangers. You'll probably never see them again. You know, if this were the Ebola virus, such as what happened in Africa, people would flock to these meetings demanding action. Not here. Not so with this, because of the stigma attached to it. People are afraid. The most significant point raised was this. We have to do something. Do we throw our hands up in the air? This is too big. Do you have any other ideas? I have a message to the parents. Any policy that's enacted is going to have flaws, things that people aren't comfortable with. Say when you go into a courtroom and they search you and you have to go through the metal detectors. Is it fun for you to have to empty your pockets? Is it fun for you to take your belt off? Of course not. But we are keeping people safe. I urge parents to make some concessions. Don't focus on an individual experience or event, but look at the total picture. Roll with it because you don't want to be in my position. No parent wants to be where I am. It is not the place you never want to be in this club. If this policy can save one life, it's worth it. When I look at this picture, this is what I see. At the bottom, privacy. At the bottom, inconvenience of having to pick up my child and take them to the lab. I only have 2 hours. Oh, partying, it's part of being a child. It's part of growing up. Consequences, do we really have to suffer consequences? And up here, it's life. We choose life, and we hope you do too. Amen and amen.
Thank you. The board will entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Ms. Anderson, second. Second by Mr. Delapietro. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carried. Thank you all very much.